America's leading expert on stress management, Dr. Marv Marshall. Dr. Marv, welcome to the program.
It's my pleasure to be here, Katarina. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You know, it's 2017, and we are living in a world that is racing. The thing I hear more and more from everyone is we have these devices in our hands that are supposed to help organize our lives, lead us to destinations, give us all of the technological advances, and yet we are so stressed out. So, Dr. Marv, my first question is, what is stress?
Stress can be defined in a number of ways.
Okay.
So, for example, if somebody cuts in front of you on the freeway, you can be stressed. We call it road rage.
Right.
Because you have not controlled your impulses. If there's a tragedy in the family, that's distress or stress. Then you go a little further, and if there's a hurricane, it's a distress. But for the general public, we refer to the word as stress because that's the most common way to refer to it. And most people do not understand the connection between the mind and the body, which we'll get into later on. But since you brought up the idea about everyone is in such a hurry and we're so stressed out, so to speak, let me share with you a little story that perhaps you can put in perspective.
Okay.
This has happened a few years ago, many years ago, even before we had telephone answering devices.
Okay.
Gentleman was entertaining his friend, and the phone rang, and it kept on ringing, and it kept on ringing. And
now, I'm guessing this is before call display and all of that, right? Okay.
Right. And his friend got a little irritated and said, "Aren't you going to answer the phone?" And the gentleman said, "I bought this phone for my convenience, and right now it's not convenient for me to answer it."
Huh.
He wanted to continue the conversation with the person. Well, the key, of course, is he made the decision. He did not let the phone control him. And this is a mindset that a lot of people don't realize. For example, I worked with the New York City Board of Education in Harlem for 3 years, and I would travel to New York on a regular basis. I had a cousin who was an editor. He handled the automobile section in Forbes magazine, a major magazine. And periodically I would have dinner with Jerry Flint, and I tried to explain to him something that, as intelligent as he was, I was not able to convince him.
Okay.
Here's what I presented to him. The phone rings, and there's a natural compulsion to answer it. The doorbell rings, there's a natural compulsion to see who's at the door. Now, there's no problem with answering the phone or the door, or stopping at a red light, which we do, until we extrapolate and we infer that the red light caused us to stop, the phone caused us to answer, the doorbell caused us to answer it. No one causes or makes you do anything. It's in our language. I had no choice. You always have a choice. Choice ends when life ends. The idea is to be cognizant and be aware that you are always making choices.
Well, and it's on that point, the point of making a choice, you have chosen to specialize in stress management and write a number of books, and we'll share some more books with the audience here shortly. What led you to want to explore this topic?
It probably came from my background in education.
Okay.
And when I came back into classroom teaching after 24 years in all kinds of positions, I taught very quickly. I taught primary, upper elementary, every grade 7 through 12. I was an elementary school principal, middle school principal, high school principal, district director of education. I was an assistant principal in charge of discipline of 3,200 kids.
Okay.
High school assistant principal in charge of curriculum and instruction. I loved what I was doing. And then one day the the superintendent of schools said, he introduced us to a financial advisor, and he said, "You folks should be thinking about your future." Well, I thought I knew something about business, since I have a master's in business administration. I knew nothing about finance. I started to put the maximum amount of money away in tax shelter annuity at the time. And then I asked myself, what do I want to do for the next 7 years before I retire?
Okay.
And I said, I get the most satisfaction of teaching kids. So I said to my superintendent, Jerry, I want to go back to the classroom next year. I was out of the classroom for 24 years.
Huh.
Had society changed, had kids changed. I saw kids who were totally irresponsible. There were parents who were afraid of their own kids. There was graffiti around, and I asked myself, I really told myself, there's got to be some way that I can teach responsibility to this generation. So I looked at my teaching experiences with kids, my counseling experiences, my recreation experiences with kids, and my administrative experiences, and I came up with a program that's now used around the world.
Now, how long ago was this? So we have some idea of what generation?
This is 20 years ago.
Okay, yeah.
And so what I discovered was a thing called counterwill.
Counterwill. What is
Counterwill
counterwill?
is the natural tendency to resist being forced.
The natural tendency to resist being forced. Okay,
coercion or being
understood.
forced.
As human beings that we
That's
have
right.
this.
You will see this in the terrible twos, the rebellious teens. And by the way, if I can mention, if people want to know more about counterwill, they can see one of my videos. I have about a 2.5 or 3 minute video.
Okay.
If you go to my website, withoutstress.com, and then click on the videos, you'll see one that says counterwill.
Okay.
Speaking about that topic.
Now, is it counterwill or counter?
Counter, it's all one word. Counterwill.
W-I-L-L.
L-L.
Counterwill.
Counterwill.
And what does this video tell us?
It tells us that when you try to coerce anyone, they're going to resist it. They're going to rebel against it. No one likes being forced. We love to tell people what to do, but for example, do you like when someone tells you you've got to do something?
No, of course not.
Exactly.
Right. And so if you have, let's say, a toddler, because stress, going back to stress for a moment, parenting, and I'm not a parent, but I'm around a lot of parents a lot of the time, has to be one of the most stressful things to go through at times. How do you introduce, or I suppose it's a toddler that is showing you counterwill?
Well, let me give you an example.
Yeah.
You catch it at the very beginning.
Okay.
The youngster, the infant, is sucking on his bottle and throws it on the floor and likes the sound, okay, and does it a few times. Well, my whole approach is to be proactive.
Okay.
Instead of waiting till somebody does something and then you react.
Okay.
What can you do to be proactive? Well, what you do is you stand by the kid. When the kid is finished with the bottle, you take it from him.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
So you're always doing something which is proactive to prevent the youngster from doing something that you don't want him to do.
And by being proactive, you're in essence reducing your own stress, because
Absolutely.
the stress would come if the child kept dropping the bottle.
And you had to pick it up.
Interesting. Now, you talk in the book about brain-body connections.
Right.
Explain that a little bit.
It started in around 1647 when a fellow by the name of René Descartes coined the words that has been the foundation of Western civilization and Western medicine. I think, therefore I am.
Yes.
Therefore, separating the mind from the body. We now know through all kinds of research that the mind cannot be separated from the body. Let me give you an example. And the epilogue in my book, Live Without Stress, and when people buy the book, I suggest they go right to the epilogue because it describes how this operates. We get things from our external approaches, basically our senses.
Okay.
So, for example, you hear something, somebody compliments you. It almost automatically gives you prompts a nice feeling. If somebody criticizes you, gives you a negative feeling. But the point is, it's all you did is you heard words, okay, and it affected your emotions. You will be watching a movie, and depending upon what you see, it will prompt an emotion, sadness or fear or excitement.
And that is my choice to react, correct?
Yes, after you understand the foundation. So the same thing happens with if you're a coffee drinker and you smell coffee first thing in the morning, it puts you in a good mood. Okay, if you touch something hot, okay, you've learned something. If you taste something, it automatically get a nice feeling, assuming you like it. If you don't like what you're tasting, it gives a negative feeling. So we get our connections through our external, our senses,
Okay.
and what we think.
Mm.
So both of these affect your emotions. Now, how do you stop a negative emotion?
How do you stop a negative emotion? That's a good question.
You should never tell someone you shouldn't feel that way. People cannot stop an emotion.
Okay.
The only way you can stop an emotion is to redirect your thinking. And the reason for this is that emotion always, without exception, stops the feeling. Let me try to explain this a little bit further. By way of an example, when I was an elementary school principal for 7 years, one day the kindergarten teacher called the office. She had a youngster who was crying and she couldn't stop his crying. I reached into my bag of tricks, pulled out a stethoscope. A physician friend gave me, hurried to the kindergarten room. The kid was still crying. I put the end of the stethoscope on my ear, put the end of it on his chest. In 3 different locations, I proclaimed him healthy, and he immediately stopped crying.
Wow.
Now, what did I do? It's a fact of life. That's all I did, is I redirected his thinking. So here's something that anybody can use if they're really angry with, if somebody's really angry with them, could be a parent or whatever. You just have to ask, are you angry at me or at the situation? Now, what you've prompted the person to do is to stop and reflect. Therefore, the person thinks, and the person will usually say, I guess I'm just frustrated and taking it out on you. Here's the key point to always remember. You cannot stop an emotion. The only way to stop it is to redirect it, and it will always come through cognition. What you say, what you hear, etc., that will change the emotion. I have a little trick that I play with myself.
What do you do?
Very quickly.
Yes.
Because I understand this, I'll be watching a movie, and I'll say to myself, you know, I hear this music in the background which is setting the mood, and I realize this is just music. I see that this scene is trying to have me have a certain emotion. That's all I'm doing is saying words. And just by being aware of this music and what I'm saying, I can immediately cut the emotion.
And it's being aware, I think, is the key there, Dr. Marv, because I'm trying to become more aware of my thoughts, because I'm trying to reduce my stress. And to your point, exactly that. I was having a conversation with my sister just the other day, and I was having one of those bad days. I'm usually a happy person, but you know, we go through waves.
Yes.
And she phoned me right in the midst of my crazy. And had she done that a couple of years ago, I would have just started to vent on her. You know, and what happens is that once you're down that path, the emotion is rolling, you gain that momentum, and you just continue to spiral. What I said to her was, I'm having a bit of a bad day. And she said, oh, tell me what's going on. And I said, you know what? I don't want to do that. I want to talk about something else. And I stopped it, redirected. We started chatting about a mutual friend. And literally within 10 minutes, I was feeling so much better. Because I interrupted that thought process. I caught it. But that takes some time, and that takes some discipline. You were going through the levels of development with me before the show started, which I found incredibly fascinating. And it's a play on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we were saying. Can you explain to the audience these levels of development? I know they can't see this little card, but we can A, B, C, D step it for them.
Okay, first I need to make it very clear that we all go through these levels at all times.
Okay. Now these are emotional levels.
These are they're combination behavior and emotional.
Okay.
And I developed this to have my students at the time understand that from my perspective, I can control them, but I couldn't change them. I wanted to change them. And the best way to change them is to have them want to do what I want them to do. Without
coercing them.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right, so hence I came up with this hierarchy. Level A is at the bottom. It's anarchy. Anarchy refers to behavior. Okay, we cannot have a civilized society with anarchy. You can't have rules, for example, if you have anarchy. going up the ladder, and it's a hierarchy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's planned that way because there's something about a hierarchy that if you're at this level, you want to get to the
It's
to the
human
higher
nature, I
level.
think, to want to
Exactly.
evolve
Right.
and grow.
So level B refers to bothering other people, bossing other people,
Mm.
bullying other people.
Mm.
So by way of an example, I'll ask a youngster who's misbehaving. He said, "You really want me to boss you, or are you mature enough to handle yourself responsibly?"
Hmm.
Okay?
Gets them
So,
thinking, doesn't it?
so level A and level B are behaviors.
Okay.
They're both unacceptable.
Okay.
Now we go up the ladder and we go to C, which is cooperation,
Mm.
collaboration. Most of us live our lives on this level.
Okay.
To have a civil society, we need to cooperate. We collaborate with other people.
Sure. Collaboration and cooperation sometimes lead to conformity, though.
That's
right?
correct, which is interesting because that's what I bring across to kids. You'll have a cartoon where you'll see a bunch of boys dressed the exact same way. And this is not a comment for or against school uniforms, but the girls are all dressed in uniforms, and the boys saying, "Huh, at our school we don't have to wear uniforms," but they're all dressed the exact same way.
Okay.
Because the easiest way to be liked
Yeah.
is to be like other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Quick story to understand this, and I'll
Sure.
I'll get back to
Yeah.
to the ABCDs. Is a kid smokes.
Okay.
Well, let me start over again. A group of kids smoke. This kid wants to be
Part of the group.
part of the group, right? What's the easiest way to do? To be like them. No one from the smoking group goes up to the other kid and say, "You want to be like us? Here's a cigarette, smoke it." It doesn't work that way.
Right.
The kid starts to smoke to be liked by the group because the easiest way to be liked is to do
conform,
what others
right.
do, okay?
Hmm.
Now that's external motivation.
Hmm.
He did it because he wants to be liked. Now, a lot of schooling is this way also. We give grades, for example. I'm not against all grades, but what I'm saying is you've got some kids who will work their butt off to get a good grade. That's in their quality world, to use Dr. William Glasser's term. But you've got some kids who are not interested in grades at school.
Mm-hmm.
And for teachers to assume that the grades are a motivating approach for all kids, it's just not valid. At any rate, so C has got to do with doing things to get approval because it's expected. Most of us.
Now, a C level, I would assume, keeps us in a relatively positive state.
It does.
Right.
And the trick is, it's not behavior, it's motivation.
Mm.
That's the key. A and B levels are behavior levels, both unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't spend any time describing them once I've exposed the kids to it because they're unacceptable.
Okay.
Now, above level C, of course, is D, which stands for the concept of democracy.
Okay.
In a democracy, you don't depend on the government, basically. At least the philosophical framework is you must be responsible. Citizens must be responsible. They've got to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily, in this case, to get a good grade or to please the teacher or to please the parent. You do right because it's the right thing to do.
Mm.
Can I give you a quick example of how important this is?
Yes, absolutely.
A woman called me maybe a year and a half or so ago and said, "Marv, I just had an experience. Have to relate it to you. I came out from the market and I got to my car and I realized I had a lime, 10 cents. I forgot to pay for it. No way did I want to go back, but I knew it was, and here's the key to D, it's the right thing to do." So she went back to the nearest cashier, gave the cashier a dime, and explained that she had walked out inadvertently with the lemon. The cashier thanked her, and then she said, "Marv, I cannot tell you how great I felt walking back to my car, doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do." You will never get that pleasure, that self-satisfaction on level D, because level D basically aims at obedience.
Level C.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Level C. Now, here's the difference between C and D. The behavior is identical. The difference is in the motivation. So, for example, if you've ever been to a teenager's room, you know they're not the most organized.
Clean, yes.
So the mother says, "At least before you go to school, make your bed." The kid makes his bed. That's good. That's the expected thing to do. But if the kid knows the levels of development and makes the bed without the mother asking, the bed is made. The behavior is identical. There's trash on the floor. In this case, the teacher asks the kid to pick it up, and he does. Of course, that's expected. But if the kid sees the trash and takes the initiative to pick it up and toss it out, the behavior is identical.
Right.
The difference is in the motivation. And a new video that I just put out this morning has got to do with, and it sort of combines Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self-actualization, with level D.
Now, Ken, how do we teach our kids to want to strive for level D on their own? Do we as a society instill that in our children during their 12 years at school? What is your experience
it's very
been?
simple. My experience is I'm proactive. I teach them. So rather than, as so many teachers do, after a kid misbehaves in class, they react. I am proactive. I ask myself, what can I do to teach so that if a kid does act in an inappropriate way, what can I do to put myself in charge? Hence, I came up with the hierarchy of social development. And I'd like to make one other comment about that.
Yes.
We all go through these levels on a regular basis. So, for example, if you're angry, chances are you're rather narcissistic. You don't care about how the other person feels. You're only interested in yourself. If you go over this level A, if you go over the speed limit, you made your own rules of the road. Okay? If you do what is expected of you, level C, that's the way most of our live our lives. But on occasion, any adult will have the opportunity not to follow the herd mentality that you see so often on television, but to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. You become autonomous. Again, most of us live our lives on level C. But if you're mindful of the fact that when you're angry or you have poor impulse control, that you're acting on an unacceptable level, when you realize that, then you're going to undergo much less stress. Well, the question is, if we can turn that card over, how do you do it?
How do you do it?
How
do you impulse management?
You think in terms of a red light.
Okay.
So
I don't know if we can zoom in on this card. We might be able to here. We'll let our production team take a minute and see if they can zoom in on this card. If they can't, what you're seeing, as Dr. Marv is explaining, is like a red light. Red, yellow, and green. So go on.
Yeah, I was going to say all these are available. If you go to withoutstress.com, everything is there.
Okay, yeah.
There's a lot of freebies on that site.
Sure.
At any rate, so the idea is the first thing you do is you take a deep gasp of breath.
Now, I'm just going to back up for a moment so that we're clear. This is now impulse management for any situation that you might find yourself in?
Exactly.
Okay, so go on. So the first thing you do is take a breath.
Right. So let's assume that you are on the freeway, and you have an interview, and you feel you're going to be late, okay? And your self-talk is, this traffic is making me so angry. The truth of the matter is that the traffic does not care. You are allowing yourself to be angry. You are becoming emotionally hijacked. So what you do, you see a red light, and you stop. Now, here's the procedure. You take a deep gasp of breath. Now, you cannot gasp with a closed mouth. It's physically impossible. You can yawn with a closed mouth, but you can't gasp.
Okay.
After you gasp, then what happens is there are nerves at the base of your jawbone called the trigeminal nerves, and these nerves are the gateway to sending the stress throughout your entire body. Just by taking a deep gasp of breath, the trigeminal nerves are released.
Oh, wow.
Then in the moment before the emotion kicks in, and the yellow, what are my options? Because you always have an option. It may be momentarily, but you have an option. You can think of, what am I going to do on my next vacation? What am I going to do tomorrow night? What you're doing basically is redirecting that impulse, okay? So you've calmed down, and then, of course, you go with your best decision. Well, I think I'll turn on the radio. So again, it's taking a gasp of breath, okay, and then thinking of your options, and then going green, going with your best choice. Let me mention one other thing. If you have a tendency to be angry on a regular basis, and if you do this 7 or 8 times, you have this new procedure. You will make new neural connections in your brain, and the amount of time, the number of times that you get frustrated with the impulse control
to minimize.
will be minimized,
Wow.
and the force of the anger will also decrease because your brain has made new neural connection because you have a procedure.
So, for example, I am in a business meeting, and you and I are disagreeing, and I'm getting, more and more frustrated. I should just, before I physically decide to punch you, because sometimes things escalate, I just take a breath.
All right.
And you're right, that opens up, and then I just think of something quickly, something else.
Such as?
This needs some practice, I think, Dr. Marv. Yeah.
Oh, lots of things do.
This is true.
But the trick is to realize that you have a procedure. And whereas in schools, for example, most teachers go on rules.
Okay.
Let me just mention just one counterproductive approach that teachers across the country use. They base their classroom management, which really has got to do with procedures, but they base it on rules. So what happens if a kid breaks a rule? If he does something that the teacher did not want? Well, the natural tendency is to enforce the rule without even realizing that the teacher has left her coat or jacket or dress from a facilitator of learning to a police officer wearing a blue button. She is now in an adversarial relationship with the kid. Totally unproductive. If teachers would look at their rules, they would realize they are either procedures in which they should teach, or they are expectations. And when teachers get the mindset of teaching a procedure, if a kid breaks a rule, the natural mindset is to teach it. You don't enter into this adversarial confrontation, which is happening in schools across the country.
And I was going to say, and then it just gets the kids stressed out and boiled, and no one is practicing impulse management.
Exactly.
Wow. So a lot of what your experience had been through the years of your career led you really to want to document and give people some steps and some tips and some tricks. Aside from impulse management, what else can people do to minimize stress? What are some techniques?
Well, the first thing you need to do is to have, again, a procedure.
Okay, we like procedures.
Okay? And, for example, in the case where you were talking about this and you were having a disagreement, the first thing I would ask personally is, what can I ask that is going to diffuse this situation? Because it always comes down to cognition. If I ask a question, the person is going to almost bound to respond. This is a natural thing. Let me try to explain where this came from.
Sure.
Or how it works. You walk into a store and the employee says, "How are you today?" Isn't there a natural tendency to react?
Yes, of course. You're going to answer, "I'm well, I'm good." Or,
Second situation, you're involved in a conversation with a friend, and all of a sudden a friend asks you a question. Do you continue on a monologue, or do you stop and answer the question?
Well, you answer the question.
That's the point. The person who asks the question controls the situation. Let me repeat that. The person who asks the question controls the conversation. So, as a result, what you want to do is think of a question that is going to prompt the person to reflect. And the book, of course, is full of many of them, like, if you couldn't fail, what would you do?
If you couldn't fail, what would you do?
What would an extraordinary person do in this situation? Notice they're all empowering. They're all, and it's a skill that anybody can learn. Asking reflective question, because that immediately stops the emotion, because the person now has got to reflect cognition, and then you're in a whole new ballgame.
You just diffuse yourself and the person you're talking to. Is there a difference, Dr. Marv, with respect to the levels of stress people feel depending on the theme that is showing up in their life? For example, is relationship stress more severe or augmented than, let's say, financial stress? Or is stress just stress?
It varies. The question is, what can you do about it? There's a chapter in the book, by the way, on finance, and there's a chapter on relationships. I have been married in December going on 60 years.
60 years.
Now,
Dr. Marvin, I
here's
have to give you a high five for that. 60 years, we need to talk after this program. Go on.
Now, the very first thing I did, I said when we got married, well, one of the tricks was we decided never go to sleep angry. You may go to bed angry, but we'll never go to sleep angry. Okay, that's number one. Number two, to be kind. Now, if you ask my wife if she's ever changed me, I'm sure she'll say no. Have I ever changed Evelyn? No. Have I influenced her? Yes. And here's how to do it. Again, it goes back to the idea of being non-coercive. I'm going to go on a little tangent so people will remember this.
Yes, absolutely.
In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where Benjamin Franklin had his printing press, there's a diorama of Benjamin Franklin leaning over talking to King George III right after the passage of the Stamp Act. And he says, you cannot coerce people into changing their minds. You cannot coerce people into changing their mind. So how to use non-coercion? If you can envision a Venn diagram, that's a circle, and then on the inside, that's where the problem is. The usual, and I've done this with 4-year-olds, the usual approach is, if you're in a confrontational situation, like Alice and Betty are having I'll use your real name.
Sure.
Marv, myself, and my wife.
Okay, and Evelyn, yeah.
All right, so the usual approach is I will tell my wife what she's doing wrong, and she tells me what I'm doing wrong. It doesn't work. Instead, you take a look at the inner circle in this Venn diagram, and here's the procedure. You notice I keep on emphasizing procedure. The procedure, not the rule. Right. The procedure is you can only talk about what you will do. So I'll say, okay, if this bothers you, this is what I will do. And it's almost magic. And this non-coercive approach, it pulls Evelyn and you say, okay, Marv, if you're willing to do this, this is what I will do. You can solve almost any problem in a non-coercive way.
Now, are we teaching any of these procedures to our children?
Well, interesting, Katerina, that you mention that, because I have a foundation. It's a discipline without stress.org that any school in this country could get my stuff for free.
Wow.
I am trying to get sponsors to sponsor this so that teachers and administrators can learn how to use authority without coercion. Lots of managers, lots of principals, lots of teachers rely on coercion because they do not know any other way how to use authority. And
so give me an example of a coercion versus cooperation. If for example, I have a child, you're the principal,
right?
And I have and I'm a teacher, and I have a child coming in who is 12 years old and intent on misbehaving.
Right.
What would be a coercive response to that misbehavior, and what would be a response that you would prefer to see?
I'm going to put your name on the board.
Okay.
And you do it again, I'm going to put a second name on the board. You do it a third time, I'm going to put a third. You do it one more time, I'm going to call your parents. That's traditional. The non-coercive approach is, Billy, what level did you just act on?
Of my A, B, C, D.
You got it. I'm prompting him to reflect. In the vast majority of cases, what will happen is the kid acknowledges he's acting on a level which is inappropriate, and that's it.
This sounds pretty genius, because even discussing it with you, when you asked the question of Billy, I felt myself pause and think, geez, I'm associating seeing Billy misbehaving, but by you asking him, what are you doing, it's making him stop and say, yes, I've been misbehaving, and then from there, you're right, he has the choice to move on. Because
he's reflected on it.
Right.
Now there's, along these same lines, lots of teachers use threats or punishments or rewards to control. Let's assume a kid acts out and continues to act out. What I will do is I'll give the kid a choice. I always give choices, even in homework. Here's the assignment. You have two choices. If you think this is not going to help you learn the lesson, what do you suggest? I'm always empowering kids. So if a kid does something which is inappropriate and it's really something has to be done about it, I'll simply say, what do you suggest we do about it? I'm going to ask the question, and I'm going to be able, and I'll have in the back of my mind to ask what else, until the kid says something which is appropriate to what he had done. When we agree, what happens then, he has made the decision of the procedure or the consequence. Instead of imposing it, I am, here's the key word, eliciting it from him. Why is it magical? Simple. People don't argue with their own decisions.
Right. This is very true. But that is all a skill and something that you have managed to cultivate over many, many years.
Anybody can do it. And if you went to withoutstress.com and looked under parents or teachers, you would see the Raise Responsibility System.
Okay.
That's the title of it, because I want to raise responsibility.
Yes.
Yeah. And so the hierarchy of social development is just part of it. The other part is critical, are 3 universal practices.
Which are? 3 universal practices for what?
For living your life.
Oh, here we go. The 3 universal practices for living your life.
For confronting stress.
Okay.
For improving relationships. Number 1, people do better when they feel good. They don't do better when they feel bad. Therefore, always talk to people in a positive way. And that includes talking to yourself, being kind to yourself. And it's critical to understand that when you talk to people, you always want to talk to them what you want them to do, not what you don't want them to do, because this is how the brain operates. Just for a moment, Katerina, think of your last dream. Did you dream in words and paragraphs, or did you dream in illusions, in pictures?
In images, right?
That's how the brain thinks.
Okay.
So if you say to a kid, don't run, the kid doesn't cognition, he doesn't remember the don't.
And he just
what
hears
picture
run.
have you?
Right.
Right?
So what would you say to a child if you don't want him to run?
Is there a better way not to hurt yourself
and still
in
get
this
there?
activity?
Right. Huh.
So what you want to do, again, positivity. People who talk to themselves in a negative way, and some people really do. They get their happiness, their satisfaction by being miserable, unfortunately.
So number 1 is positivity.
Talk to people, to yourself and other people in a positive way. What you want them to do, not what you don't. Number 2, remember that choice ends when life ends. You are always making choices. We're making a choice doing this right now. Okay? You make a choice when you get out of bed. The one thing to make it easier for you is to develop a procedure. It's because what happens is, when you get out of bed, you do the same thing every day. Okay? So, for example, if you're doing something which is having you come out in a bad mood in the morning,
frazzled, right?
Right. What procedure can you do? It's the key to reducing your stress.
So, for example, if I'm a parent and I'm jumping out of bed in the morning because the one child is crying and the other one needs breakfast and I haven't yet brushed my teeth, a procedure might be to set mild. Right. Go ahead. Yeah.
Right. Just take a deep breath and say, they're going to live. They'll be okay. I want to enjoy parenting, and I realize I'm going to enjoy this process, even though it's going to take a little time, because they're going to live.
And perhaps a procedure might be to set your alarm clock 15 minutes early,
right,
to give yourself a little bit of that time to get into your day.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So number 1, number 2.
Positivity.
Right.
Number 2 is choice. You're always making choices.
And number 3?
Number 3 is reflection. As we talked about earlier, you can control people, but you cannot change them. The only way to change them is to have them change themselves, and the key behind that is to ask a question which will prompt them to think, and anybody can learn this.
And we can do this on ourselves as well.
Absolutely.
So your top 3 strategies, I suppose, for getting through life. Number 1, we said positivity. Number 2 was choice.
Right.
And number 3 is reflection.
Right.
Wow.
I'm always reflecting. For example, if I take my wife off, and maybe this is the reason why I came back into education, even though I had spent years in business administration, is I love to learn. You know, to me, learning ends when life ends. Even today, even coming here this morning, I learned something. At any rate, so if I do something that ticks Evelyn off, I have learned to make lemonade out of any lemon. Any lemon. I will learn something from it, and I'll say, okay, Marv, what can you learn from this?
From this encounter.
From this encounter, from what I did to tick her off, so that I know if she is going to change, it's going to be what I will do differently. Much the same way, when kids come into a classroom, if there's going to be any change, it's not going to be what the kids do. They're always going to come in the same way. It's what the teacher will do. And successful teachers realize the teaching business, the profession, is motivation and relationships. And most of them do not realize that.
I think motivation and relationships gets us all through life, whether we're in school or not.
And most problems, if people stop and reflect, when they have difficulty, they have stress, and the vast majority of times it's going to be in a relationship. It's relationship prompted. By the way, you mentioned parenting. After I developed my book, Discipline Without Stress.
I was going to say, we have discipline, parenting without stress.
Right. What happened is I figured I should, since so many parents are having difficulty with their kids, they're not having the joy that parenting should have, I put one chapter in it. And then people said, would you please write a book just for parents?
Right, because and it's a small chapter in this book, in the original book about parenting and stress. So you went on to write an entire book.
On parenting without stress. And read the subtitle.
How to Raise Responsible Kids While Keeping a Life of Your Own. This is a question I know many of my parent friends ask themselves. And so how do we raise responsible kids while keeping a life of our own? Buy the book, folks.
Yes, there are lots of good stuff in there, truly. So, for example, I'll give you a very simple one.
Yes.
Ask a parent, do you ever say no to your kid? And he'll say, you often. I say, okay, here's a suggestion. Say not yet. It has the exact same effect, but doesn't cut the relationship. It's amazingly simple.
And so the child doesn't feel rejected.
Exactly.
He just feels heard. And probably forgets about it 5 minutes later.
Right.
That's genius.
And that's the key point. Kids want to be recognized. What so many parents do is they will jump in. They don't basically, from the kid's viewpoint, allow the kid to be recognized. It works like this. A teenager is going to do something, and the father, who has lived longer, obviously, says, that's really not a good idea. And then he starts lecturing the kid. Now, the kid is trying to cut the umbilical cord.
Wants to do his thing.
Right. The father's intentions are good. But from the kid's viewpoint, my dad's trying to control me again. Now, so often what would happen if the father just listens, I say to the parent, it's difficult as it is, zip the lip. Just listen to your kid. Acknowledge what the kid wants. The kid will come back half hour later to his dad and say, that really wasn't a good idea. The father didn't do anything. As the kid related orally what he was doing, he realizes it's really not a smart idea. He did it himself.
Rather than take on this aggressive, I'm going to be my own boss stance.
Exactly.
And there's no communication happening on either side.
That's right.
What is your third book there, sir?
Well, the first one is the first one I wrote.
Oh, the first one is the first one. All right, we're out of order here, folks. So the first one is Discipline Without Stress, Punishment and Rewards.
Right.
And then you wrote Live Without Stress.
Well, what happened is I wrote the discipline book first, and if you take a look at the title of it, it says How Teachers
and Parents Promote Responsibility and Learning.
And so I put one chapter in that book after I wrote that book. Then people says, please write a book just for parenting. That's it.
Right.
That's the parenting book. And then I said, I reflected, and I felt really an obligation to share with other people what I have learned.
Yeah.
And so hence Live Without Stress. And by the way, the book just came out in January of this year and already has won the prestigious Eric Hoffer Award.
That is a very prestigious award. Congratulations to you for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Dr. Marv, you are emitting, for those of you that, are obviously not here in studio with us, but I can tell you that you are emitting a very tranquil energy.
Well, thank you.
And it's quite nice. You have managed clearly to deal with stress in your own life. You have had a successful career, an even more successful marriage. And so I think a lot of this comes down to taking responsibility for our own lives and our own thoughts and our own choices. And it comes down to what we said at the top of the program. We have the ability to choose.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can I make a short commercial?
Yes, absolutely.
The book, Live Without Stress,
Uh-huh.
also has its own website. You can either go to you can go to withoutstress.com and go to the shop, or you can go to withoutstressbook.com. Anyone who buys, because it comes as an e-book and as a printed book, anyone who buys the printed edition gets 2 for the price of 1. And the reason for that is, and people who have purchased the other book say, I will never give this book away because there's so much in it. So what will happen is you buy one book, one you can keep, and the other, if you like it,
give it away.
You can give it to a friend.
Well, and the beauty of that, Dr. Marv, is the fact that this is meant to be of service and of value to people. Correct. And that's very gracious of you to offer that to people. Can you tell them the website one more time for anyone interested?
Sure. Withoutstress.com. There are videos. I put up a video once a week or so, once every other week, called Stress Management Tips. That's free. There's a lot of free stuff on the website, which is free. But the main website is withoutstress.com. And, of course, I'm a professional speaker, having spoken in 25 countries on 5 continents. From that, withoutstress.com, you can go to my speaking website, which is marvinmarshall.com.
Yes, and invite you in to speak on this topic. Last thoughts, Dr. Marv, on stress. What would you like to leave our audience with today?
That you never have to be a victim. We have a victimhood mentality in this country, and regardless of the situation you cannot change, like kids cannot change their parents, obviously, regardless of the stimulation that occurs, regardless of an urge, you never have to be a victim, because you always have the power to choose your response to whatever the situation is.
Easier said than done some days, but very, very wise. Dr. Marv, thank you so much for being with us today. This was very important information. It's such an important discussion, and it's, you know, the longevity of our youth and of ourselves is paramount. It's going to be as we continue to age and continue to grow and see how this country further develops. But I thank you so much for your additions to trying to make it a better place for all of us, myself included. It was a real pleasure today. We thank you as well for watching. It is always fun here at Book Circle Online. Again, Dr. Marvin Marshall, Live Without Stress, and you can go to his website, which was withoutstress.com. I would urge you to do that. Again, I'm your host, Katerina Kazayas. Thank you for being with us. And for now, we will bid you adieu and see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye now.
From Managing Editor Jason Squamata, Executive Producers Maria Menounos, Phil Svitek, and Kevin Undergaro, we would like to thank you for tuning in to Book Circle Online. For more discussion, go to bookcircleonline.com. And if you have comments, questions, or book title suggestions, write us at info@bookcircleonline.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this is Book Circle Online. BCO, join the circle.